Hello and welcome to episode 87 of The Garden Log with me, Ben Dark. I am a gardener and this is a gardening podcast. I am broadcasting to you on a wet day in early March 2021. Outside there is quite a good breeze building up. I think it's going to be a last March lion gust, shake all the dead wood out of the trees, get things stirring again. I always feel a bit sorry for the wind in midwinter because there's not a great deal to blow about, just bare bits of tree and the occasional sturdy evergreen. But this March wind has more to play with. It has big tall daffodils to knock flat and ruin, and it has fresh growth on the roses to rub together and knock the buds off. So altogether it has more purpose, and I hope it has a satisfaction as it goes hurtling off over the North Sea. I have satisfaction, of course, because I am a gardener and have been gardening. This week I am talking about cutting back deciduous grasses. I'm talking about a good combination of two different species of crocus that flower at the same time and look beautiful together. I'm talking about disasters in tree planting, two specific sorts of disasters, but all my hands and fingers are still intact, and I have a job, so it can't be that bad, really. I'm also giving a brief roundup of life in the garden. I realise it's been rather a long time since I last talked to you, so we are having a catch-up with life among the growing stems, or not growing stems, as they might be, of the garden. There's an awful lot to get on with, so no point drawing this introduction out. Let's get on with the week in gardening. Hello and welcome to the week in gardening. It's been a little while since you were in the garden with me, so I thought that I would just give a little walk around and talk about what's done well and what did not survive the winter. It had been a pretty generic English winter until the second week of February, when we got that period of really bitter cold. That Arctic vortex up there that's ever swirling east around the North Pole did a little fragmenting trick and sent itself eddying all about, and the jet stream got all slack and wobbly, and we got air flowing all over the place where it shouldn't be, and coming down to slump over the Chiltern Hills. Bits that should by rights have been scouring somewhere north of Greenland. And it really did knock everything backwards, not least us gardeners. I was trying to build a little bit of rockery, as I always am, in the shade in a corner of the garden, and the ground just froze solid. You could swing a spade at it as hard as you liked, and it would draw a little white line in the surface. We did get snow, and it stayed on the ground for a week or so. The temperature didn't rise above 0 for a few days, and it got down to -5. And as I remember telling you, that is the danger for things like tree ferns, to those two conditions. And sure enough, all those lush, loose, evergreen fronds have been blasted back, shriveled and dropped off. That's the most obvious bit of damage. A more permanent damage in the garden has occurred to some of the evergreens, some of the tender evergreens particularly. I'm talking about ceanothus. Ceanothus is the California lilac, that quite leathery, dark-leaved shrub with the wonderful licorice all-sort blue pom-poms of flower in the spring. And I think that ours have been killed not by the pure cold, but by that unfortunate thing that happens to evergreens when the ground freezes deep down and stays that way Most of its roots, its water-gathering roots, are in the top part of the soil. And when that freezes, it is unable to draw up water, but it is still losing water from those evergreen leaves. And so there's a danger when you have wind and frozen ground, or sun and frozen ground, that the plant just dries up. And that appears to have happened to at least 2 of the ceanothus in the garden. I am wondering whether they will come back. We're going to lose them for this year, certainly. They won't be doing anything interesting, which is a pity. I'm wondering if they'll come back from a hard prune, or whether we should look at changing them for something else. It's a decision to be made when we know if they're going to be coming into leaf. It's funny how you think of evergreens as always in leaf, always just slowly growing like human fingernails or hair, until you start working with them. I always thought that, say, a privet hedge just pushed out privet leaves all year round, which was how it stayed green, until I started dealing with privet hedges on a professional basis and noticing that about now, in early March, they completely bubble with new growth. They put on a whole coat of fresh leaf all over. And that is the main thing that carries them through the year. It's just that they don't happen to drop it in November. It's not that they're always producing. Anyway, we should, if the ceanothus are still living, get a similar flush from them, which is what I'm hoping for. I don't know about the tender things, whether they live or not. The musa, those are the hardy bananas that have been wrapped up out in the garden. I'm hoping that they are still with us under there. Some of the cannas that we left in the ground are probably done for. The dahlias that we left in the ground, I think, should be okay. It's more the wet that will get to the dahlias in the cold. And other tender stuff, the geranium madurense, has been severely beaten back and crumpled, but I think might be alive. Certainly the seedlings are alive, which is a joy or a curse either way, depending on whether you like the plant or not, because we have a vast amount of them from our successful flowering last year. Other things that got knocked back, we lost all the foliage on the Melianthus major, which is not a great shame. I prefer to cut them back each year anyway. I think once they're left standing up for a couple of years, they start looking horrible and worthless. They are technically a sub-shrub, I believe, but they're much better treated as a pure herbaceous perennial and cut back to the ground. There was some damage to things that come out early and had started producing growth and flower buds already. So we lost quite a lot of growth on some of the wallflowers that we had in the borders starting to get ready to flower, the erysimum. But that didn't really matter because they're such willing little plants. They have such a desire to please the gardener that they are already growing through that and have started flowering and producing that incredible wallflower smell. I don't know if you've smelt it yet this year. You forget how wonderful it is. To me, it smells like one of those paper bags of aniseed balls. If you stick your head in there and it's sweet and somehow aniseedy and spicy and really, really decent smell. So if you have any wallflowers around you, then maybe go and stick your nose into them right now. Nothing else really got damaged. Lemon trees were protected. The seedlings that were sown were in the greenhouse. The stuff in the cold frame froze completely solid, but it was stuff that was intended to freeze solid, as it were. Little seedlings of larkspur and poppy. They've gone out in the garden now. And then the snow melted and we were released from winter. The temperature swung up at one point about 20 degrees over the course of the week, from -5 to 15 degrees Celsius, which was fantastic. And everything that had been put on hold, that had been held back by that, came whooshing into life. The very best scene this year is one that we created in the autumn, which is always so pleasing when it isn't just the majesty of spring, it is man's hand involved as well. It is the big tree circle that we planted under the largest of the black-leaved cherry plums in the lawn. The black-leaved cherry plum is Prunus saricifera nigra, I think I've talked about it on here before, how much I dislike it. In fact, I've certainly talked about how much I dislike this tree on here a number of times. If you're one of the people who's emailed me saying that they've listened to the whole back catalogue over lockdown, then you're probably better acquainted with how many times I've rubbished it. It's not a particularly nice tree, it's a light suck. Now it is looking fantastic because it's in blossom, and last October we planted 600 Crocus, chrysanthus, cream beauty underneath it, and 200 Crocus tomasianus, bars purple. Crocus chrysanthus cream beauty is a goblet-shaped crocus, very early, very floriferous, with cream petals, not that bright, irradiated egg yolk yellow that you sometimes get in yellow crocuses, but something a lot more subtle, with bright orange stamen. It's a very long-lasting, sturdy little crocus. And Tomasianus bars purple is a very early, very classic star crocus, one that when the sun comes out transforms into a completely different flower, open and lilac coloured. But when the sun is in, it's like a pilot light in the bottom of a boiler, almost blue and upright and thin. And together in that ratio, they really, really work. They look incredibly natural and light. And the cherry plum above them is just coming into blossom. And for all the stick I give this tree, there are a few weeks in the year where it is unmissable, because it's out before all of the other blossoming trees, out before the blackthorn, out before any of the cherries or the hedgerow plums. And it flowers on semi-pendant branches, and the wood behind them is black as anything. So these wonderful white blossoms against the black wood give a raindrops at night time kind of look, like one of those sopping wet film premieres in late November, when the flash bulbs are going off and the rain is coming down and all of the superstars are hurrying past on the red carpet. Something fleeting, something suspended, a magical moment. And that's what we've got above, with this beautiful circle of crocuses below. And it's a bit of the garden that had always been something of a nothing. And now at least it will have its 3-4 weeks of glorious show-stopping stardom. Anyway, that's what's looking good and what's looking bad. I must add that the other thing that looked awful after the cold were all the roses that had somehow been lulled into thinking that they were evergreen plants. You know, the types, the ramblers, I'm talking about Rambling Rector and Rosa Banksia lutea, who think, well, I'll just hang on to these leaves over winter, thank you very much. I'm more than tough enough to look after them. And unlike all of the shrub roses and the climbers, which had done the decent thing and shed the roses for us gardeners to collect, these had clung onto them until the middle of February, when they were unceremoniously blasted brown by the cold. And there they stood, the roses looking very foolish, as we had to go and clean up their mess, go and pull them off themselves and tell them, you are still a rose, this is still England, we can still get cold weather. Those have been put back in order now and are actually flourishing. They're thrusting out those bits of rose growth. Anyway, on Monday, I did some planting. I was planting a large multi-stemmed Acer. This is Acer griseum, the paper bark Acer, the one with the wonderful red stems that seem to flake off. It is a proper tree, in contrast to the Japanese maples, which are lovely, delicate things, but have a tendency to grow to waist height and then start giving up on life. This is something that will be big enough one day to hang a swing in, to lie under with a book. And I adore the tree. It is so pleasing to see when mature. It has green leaves, no nonsense green, and that brilliant red trunk. It's the colour of a New Mexican desert, that rock turning red at sunset. It's earthy and sort of glows. And one day this specimen is going to break some hearts, I'm sure. At the moment, it's only a little bit taller than I am. It came in a big pot of, I don't know what it was, 65 litres or 100 litres or something, for which I had to dig a very deep hole. And this hole was between the house and the road, next to the driveway there. So unbeknownst to me, there's all sorts of things running around under the soil. And I had that worrying gardener's moment where you're absorbed in the job, you're heading ever downwards, down to about 2 foot, and then your spade strikes something and water fountains halfway up the shaft of the spade. There's this horrible moment where you're thinking, is this an arterial bleed? Is this a flesh wound? Do I need to shut off the water? This is between the house and the road. Can I even shut it off? Is this some sort of water main? Are we going to be flooded? Are we going to be floating away on the tool shed? And the water, meanwhile, kept flowing up and up the sides of the hole and sloshing to around ankle height, I suppose. I fell down to the bottom into the muddy water and found this ribbed plastic. It was a bit of that black cable duct that people put electrical wires in, and not a water main itself. I think it would be hard to go through one of those polyurethane water mains with a corner of a spade. So I guessed it was a duct and left it, went away. And then in the time it took to drink a cup of tea, it had filled the hole but wasn't overflowing, and I was able to finish the planting job in the afternoon. On Tuesday, we were verticutting the lawns. Verticutting sounds very technical, but just think of it as vertical cutting. It is one of those bunged together words. It is cutting with a reel of blades that are facing towards the soil. And it's designed to not go into the soil, but to cut off all of those little stolons, those little creeping sideways branches of grass, and make sure that the habit that the grass gets into is upright. It is putting its energy in growing towards the light, not growing sideways. If you have a plant that does too much growing sideways, it sort of crowns. It goes bare in the middle, like a person with a centre parting. All of the tips are off sideways, and the head itself is actually pretty flat. And we don't want a lawn like a centre parting. We want a lawn like someone who's had a military buzz cut, when every little hair is standing up like a bristle upon their head. It's good practice to get into as well prior to cutting. Just have your grass standing up so that it meets its whirling death blades stood up and honourable, like a decent blade of grass should. I think this year we are going to aim to do this every couple of weeks at least, if not weekly, prior to cutting. I know it's not a particularly glamorous or lifestyle-driven area of horticulture, fine lawn work, but there is huge satisfaction in it. You can see why the gardeners in charge of those beautiful quads in the Oxford colleges take such pride in the lawn. There's nothing better than a pure area of absolutely perfect grass surrounded by something a bit more romantic. It's wonderful if you can surround it with a medieval college hung in roses, as they can in Oxford, but surround it with beautiful flower borders dripping with scent and throbbing with bees, and that's enough. It's not at all fashionable, but there's nothing that sets off a garden like a little bit of lawn in the middle. It doesn't have to be very good, but if it's small, then we should try to make it as good a quality as we can. I've been thinking quite a lot about grass recently and the unique properties that it has. It seems to me it's rather like water. It's ubiquitous, but it also has a fairly unique characteristic which we ignore. In water's case, it is of course that it expands when it freezes, which is why it blows up our pipes, Blew up quite a few of our taps actually in February. Blew the little attachment bits off the end of them. So we've had to go around replacing those. But that doesn't just cause it to blow up pipes, of course. It also means that ice floats on the top of the sea rather than sinking to the bottom and slowly having an entire ocean that is 6 miles deep of ice. We get this thin little layer of ice on top and a beautiful liquid sea beneath. Almost every other material in the universe contracts as it gets colder. Thank goodness for the unique properties of water. And grass has a similar uniqueness in that it has that extra meristem, it has the extra growth area at the base of the blades. So if you think about a normal plant, they grow from buds, the primary growth, and then they have secondary growth, which is the growth that makes the trunk thicker. But there's a third in grass at the base which pushes the blade upwards and means that you can take the top off again and again and again without removing the growth zone. Imagine if every blade of grass were a little tree, and it would grow up, and then the lawnmower would come and it would cut all of those growth buds off, and the thing would have to branch lower down and come again to try and get to that height, like a hedge does. And it wouldn't work. Lawns would not exist. Grass is a miraculous thing, and it seems churlish of us not to make use of these unique ornamental properties that it has. Anyway, on Wednesday we had a last little clear out and cut back. That was cutting back all of the deciduous grasses. The Hacknacloa, most urgently, because it had begun to scatter itself across the garden like bits of straw blown from a local stables. It was across the lawns and other flower beds. It was time to go. It stayed lovely and golden like a wheat this year. Sometimes it seems to go a bit grey in the winter, but this year it seemed still sun-washed and glowing, which was really nice. It might be a personal perception thing. Maybe I'm just looking at the world differently this winter. I don't think so. I think I normally see things fairly clearly, and to me it looked lovely and golden still, but was starting to come loose and scatter itself about. So I chopped all of that back, and good job that I did, because the little horns of new growth, those dark purple spears, were starting to show through, and in some cases had grown to 2 centimetres or so. So any longer and I would have had a devil's time taking up enough of the old growth without damaging the new growth. Hacknacloa is one of those plants, a bit like a privet really, where almost all of its growth is done at once at the beginning of the year, and the rest of it just toughs it out. Gets ragged or grey if it must, but just keeps on keeping on. You don't get a constant renewal as you do with some other plants. So if you've damaged it badly in its cutback, you left it till April, you have a whole year of an ugly thing staring at you and forcing you to consider the error of your ways. We also cut back the Pennisetum grass, the grass that has those wonderfully tactile, furry, fluffy caterpillar-like seed heads, like a curved-over bottle brush seed head. They'd lost their seed heads and turned into a mass of horrible, hollow-tubed nightmare. And they were cut back with a long-handled hedge trimmer held upside down with the blade at the angle of an ice hockey stick. And that's quite a nice way to go straight through them, rake the grass off. Then actually we noticed that the crowns were vast, so dug them up, split them, and moved a load of them off to a new bed. And then it was a case of moving on to the semi-evergreen grasses. The Nacella tenuissima, used to be Stipa tenuissima, the Mexican fountain grass, which retained some elements of green at the bottom of its rather washed out foliage from last year. I tried to comb the bad stuff out, as you might do to a rotten old jumper, but it didn't really work, so in the end I knifed them all off about 1 centimetre off the ground. For that, you really just need to make sure that your secateurs are nice and sharp. Then you hold one of the handles tight in your fist so that you're effectively using it as a knife, and slash your way through the grass, chuck it all away. It looks fairly brutal, but the grass will be much better off for it. While doing that, we took out the various weeds that you notice mumbling through these perennial borders. There's some creeping buttercup knocking about the place. It's very satisfying to get it out early in the year, particularly when it's lurking near ground that will become completely covered in ornamentals. And you just know that had you not got it, it would have started running around in the undergrowth, causing a mischief for itself. I had a lot of fun doing that. It felt like a proper day's gardening. A start at this end of the bed, finish at that end of the bed, with 14 wheelbarrows of stuff removed and everything ready to start garbing itself in the new leaves of the new year. On Thursday, I was at home doing the daycare duties and walking around in search of cats and dogs to look at, a new hobby that everyone can enjoy. We also went to the park to look at the ducks. No cormorant for me this time, which was something of disappointment, but my companion didn't seem to mind awfully. In Dulwich Park, there is a brilliant little parakeet nest in one of the very, very old oak trees by the duck pond. It's probably only about 10 foot in the air, and this bold couple of parakeets go in and out of it constantly, so I assume there are little ones inside. If anyone wants to go and look at a parakeet up close, then I really recommend that spot. You'll have to go round to the lake side of the tree and peer your head a little bit around the corner, but it's fantastic for parakeet watching. I'd never realised quite how wonderful and yellow their tails are. I thought they were green all over, but there we are. On Friday, I had to put the parakeets behind me and go back to work. We planted some large, already toperized yew trees in huge metal planters. These are bespoke lead planters, and the trees are absolutely vast. Neither of them want to move particularly, and yet somehow one has to go inside the other. So the process involved building a ramp out of scaffold boards and pallets, chainsawing it all down to about the right size, so that you had a ramp resting on a pallet at exactly the height of the flower pot, and then sliding the plant in its pot up the ramp and getting to the top, and then chainsawing it out of its pot, cutting through the pot so that the pot fell away like a clothing in a cartoon where someone's pulled one thread and the outfit crumples to the floor. So the pot fell away, and then somehow squinching the plant off the end of the scaffold board to land delicately in the compost provided in the pot. And squinch we did, and the plants fell heavy, but almost on target. With a bit of jiggling, they were centred and potted up and left as these things must be in front of the house. Such architectural plants, they need a bit of architecture behind them. Putting them in the garden would almost look like parking a car in the garden. They're so obviously a house, terrace, driveway kind of thing. And that took most of the day. Ran around doing a bit of general tidying, stick clearance, compost heap turning. We started a new heap for the new year, if anyone's interested. We've put in a lot of leaves collected in the autumn and a little starter pack, a microbial burst of the old compost. And now we are gradually adding the hot lawn clippings from the verticutting to that to get things really, really cooking up. The compost we took out at the end of last year, beginning of this year, had gone a little bit cold, had stopped doing anything. This year we want to keep things much hotter. We want to keep things alive and cooking. We want to get it to almost the heat of one of those council compost heaps. Sort of heat you could sous vide a fillet of fish in. So yes, checked on the compost and checked on a few other things. Stretched the back out after a day of heavy lifting and went home to begin the weekend. Anyway, enough of that. Let's see if I have any recommendations for you this week. No real recommendations this week. Some heartfelt thanks, though. I'd like to thank all of the people who have donated on Ko-Fi since the last episode. It means a great deal to me. So I'd like to say thank you to Tertia Houston, to Rich, to Hedda, to Madeline Fox, to the anonymous supporter, to Juliet, to Gardens by Serendipity, to JK, to Calvin, to Elizabeth, and to KS. Thank you hugely for the support. That, once again, is the hosting of the podcast, well and truly paid for, and enough funds left over to go and buy some interesting books, or a beer, or a coffee, or whatever I fancy, really. So thank you very much. If anyone else would like to join them, you can find the link at Ko-Fi, that's ko-fi.com/Ben Dark. If you'd like to get in contact with me in any other way, then the best way is to email thegardenlogpodcast@gmail.com. I am always interested in seeing pictures of the listeners' gardens and just hearing what you're up to generally. So don't feel shy in that regard. There's also a Facebook group at the Garden Log Podcast, I believe. Not the page, the group is better. There's occasionally things on there. And hopefully I'll see some of you in there. If not, I'll see you back here for episode 88 of the Garden Log. I know I've been talking about spring things and the need to cut back grass before it's too late, but really, gosh, the year is young. There isn't any rush yet. Don't feel the need to get up and turn the podcasts off quite yet. We have a long, glorious hot growing season ahead of us, and it doesn't need to start right now. You don't need to be in the garden for the sake of it. Wait until the urge takes you. Just had a squirrel on the roof. I don't know if you can hear that. Between the sirens of South London, little squirrel has just run across and scampered off again. Anyway, that's enough of that. I hope you have a very good week, whether you make it into the garden or not. Thank you very much for listening, and goodbye.